Hello and welcome everyone to the CDO Magazine interview series. I'm Anthony Lampelius, the Vice President of Revenue Growth and Strategy at Wavical Data Solutions. We are partnering with CDO Magazine, MIT CDO IQ, and the International Society of Chief Data Officers in a series of phenomenal interviews with extraordinary guests. Today, I'm very excited to have the pleasure of speaking with Seth Dorman, Chief Data Officer at IBM. Seth, thank you for joining us today and welcome.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Absolutely, Seth. To kick this off, typically, when I speak to industry-leading chief data officers like yourself, I always like to start by really understanding, what was the journey that brought you to become a chief data officer with IBM? And if you could give us a little background on that career progression and your path to IBM today, that'd be great.
Yeah, that's an especially relevant question for chief data officers because there's not even remotely a defined path to becoming one. And so my background's unique even among chief data officers. So I'm actually a human molecular and statistical geneticist. So my PhD is in neuropsychiatric genetics. And 25 years ago when I was doing my PhD, we were using all the same tools we use today when we think about, big data and data science, Python, R. Of course, there was no Hadoop back then, but, and so I have a long history of using those tools. But my journey went through, running labs and, data analysis operations in industry and academia relating to human and plant genetics. And when I was at my last company, we had some very significant impacts on the business processes around our product development pipeline that led me to start applying those same tools that I described, plus, modern applications of them when we think about Hadoop and all the NoSQL and all the modern what we call big data, as much as I dislike that term, tooling and technologies at scale to solve other business problems. And so I spent 5 years at that company doing that. I had a very significant impact on the top and the bottom line. Led a cultural transformation of data, both data, and partnered on an agile transformation with my peer who led the development organization. And ultimately, at some point, I decided I wanted to, don't have a data or IT background. I wanted to go to a technology company and kind of do two things, get some credibility in the field, as well as learn about other industries. And so that's how I wound up at IBM. I've been at IBM for 4 years, and as the chief data officer for, we have multiple chief data officers. I'm the chief data officer for our cloud and cognitive software business, which represents more than a third of our revenue today and probably close to 75 or 70% of our revenue after we complete the spinoff of our one of our businesses.
Well, it's a pretty incredible journey to see kind of, how you got into this role and how that's, really brought you through IBM and built up that background. So, kind of going off of that, I see a lot of talk around digital transformation. And we see it happening coming out of 2020, right? A lot of change. And I was hoping you could tell me a little bit about some strategic initiatives that you're seeing in the market today, really around organizations developing more of a disruptive cloud strategy, advanced machine learning concepts, and even looking at artificial intelligence for trust and transparency.
Yeah, so, what we think of as digital transformation has been going on for, 8-9 years at this point, right? That's what we called what we went through at my former company. I think the difference is, especially what we went through last year with the pandemic, digital transformation has been accelerated. And there's a few core foundational elements to digital transformation today that just weren't available as commodity previously. One is this concept of hybrid cloud. In order to digitally transform, it almost requires that you go to a cloud environment. And cloud environment can mean multiple things. It can mean a public cloud like IBM Cloud or AWS or Microsoft Azure. It could mean a private cloud. We've doubled down on private cloud, and that typically means something that runs on containers. So in our case, it's Kubernetes and through Red Hat. And it also means a combination of these, because you're not just going to, even if your destination is 100% public cloud, you're not just going to get there instantaneously. So there's this transition period where even if you're going 100% to a single cloud, you're going to be in a hybrid cloud environment where you're going to have a private cloud and you're going to have your public cloud and you're going to have your legacy environments that are not cloud. And if you look at companies that have been really successful at digital transformation, they're not on one public cloud. They're on multiple public clouds. They may have one public cloud that's home base, but all the public clouds have specific values that they can add. And so they go to these other clouds, but you need to maintain a cohesive data and development and application environment. Plus, when you think about tools like Salesforce and Workday, those are clouds themselves. So how do you integrate that data in a hybrid world? So that's one aspect is everything's got to be hybrid and probably multi-cloud. The other aspect, when you think about we think about applying AI, there's some core components to AI that as businesses we need to think about. First and foremost is trust and transparency. So how do you build trustworthy AI? How do you ensure that your AI is trustworthy? And by trustworthy, I include fair in that. And I could spend an hour just talking about that. The other component of AI is automation. So how do you both automate your AI, but more importantly, how do you take that AI and use it to at least partly automate processes? Not to remove humans entirely, but to help them do their jobs more effectively, often requires automation. So a great example of that is I go into a virtual agent, and this is a way oversimplified example. I log into my bank. I need to change my password. I don't want the virtual agent to say, go to this website to change my password. I want the virtual agent to say, okay, here, what do you want your password to be? Here's your new password. It's all set, right? I don't want to have to leave. So that's a way oversimplified example, but still not something that happens with most banks' virtual agents. And so talked about trust, talked about and transparency, talked about automation. The other important part for businesses especially is, mastering the language of a business in your AI. So when you look at, NLP models, so natural language processing and natural language understanding models, businesses often have a lot of jargon that are industry specific and corporation specific. How do you use commodity NLP or close to commodity NLP models to understand your business and then take that understanding and extract meaningful tidbits? So, the way we use this inside IBM is if you go to our website and you're looking at a particular product. When we release a new product on our website, there's new features and new capabilities in there. So the FAQs need to be updated. We can have one of our product managers go in and manually update the FAQs, or we could have an NLP model that automatically extracts the new capabilities and inserts them into our web page and into the virtual agent that's on that web page. So those are the kinds of things that you can do with when you really truly master the language of business in your AI.
Yeah, and that that's great to really hear your understanding of that. And I see a lot of IT and business really trying to bridge that gap. So when we look at these, much needed technology initiatives and, even technologies for organizations to take advantage of today, how have you seen other CDOs really enable business and IT to work together to accomplish their goals and really get value quickly?
So I guess the key factor in that is a couple key factors is outcomes. So IT should not do this alone. CDO should not do this alone. And quickly. And get them done quickly. So the two components that I laid out are really driven by two different things. So getting to the right outcome, you need a design thinking type methodology to help extract the decisions that are important to your business, so the outcomes, and correlate that to value. Every decision a business makes, it either saves you money or makes you money, right? So you need to tie that value to the decision you're trying to drive. Most decisions worth making are not going to be a single model or a single project. So you need a way to deconvolute that decision into its component parts. And then you need to go into the second piece, which is delivering value quickly. That requires an agile methodology. And when you set these projects up correctly, and done this multiple times inside of IBM at my previous company and with, literally hundreds of clients at this point, getting value as fast as 6 weeks, right? So going through this design thinking process, identifying the decisions you want or the outcomes you want to address, selecting a series of models that will provide value, and in 3 sprints, actually realizing value. And there's a great use case we did with a client, Wunderman Thompson, where we did a project with them. In 6 weeks, they actually released a product to their customers where they were using this model that we helped them in this pipeline, that AI pipeline we helped them build to sell customized marketing campaigns. Wunderman Thompson's a marketing campaign to their customers, something they had been trying to do for 8 years that had been an intractable problem for them at that point.
See, when I think of that, driving that much value within 6 weeks, and typically it takes, a lot longer, it's pretty incredible. And they took advantage of the opportunity, right, and really put together those design thinking principles to drive outcomes. And, a lot of engagements with enterprise organizations that I have today, I try to focus a lot on, really building out the complete data and analytics strategy, but also the business strategy, right? Side by side, both business and IT. And I love seeing, coming out of those engagements, seeing new trends to really help develop new offerings with clients. Can you give me, some examples of maybe some other client data strategy projects you guys have been a part of that really drove business outcomes fast?
Yeah, and I think, that's a good point you bring up, Anthony. There's data strategy, there's AI strategy, and there's business strategy. I am a huge proponent of you can't do any of them independently of each other. You can't create an AI strategy without a data strategy, and you can't create a data strategy without a business strategy. And if you try and tackle executing a data strategy without a business strategy, it's going to be years for you to show any value. And we frame it up in the context of what we call the AI ladder, right? You have to collect your data, you have to organize your data, you have to analyze your data, and you have to infuse it, right? And if you were to build out each one of those rungs, it would be 6 to 18 months to build out a rung, right? And so let's just get to the point where you can organize the data and make it available to people. You're looking at 2 to 3 years, right? In today's world, no one has the patience for that. And so getting back to the design thinking methodology I was talking about, you identify these use cases and you execute and build that strategy around those outcomes. And then you are able to, like I talked about in the Wunderman Thompson example, we have tons of examples inside IBM where we've done the same thing. You actually get value from while you're building out the platform that builds credibility for you as a CDO in your organization, and also makes, when money gets tight, as it always does, especially, the last 12 months and probably for the next 6, you're no longer a cost center, right? You still are a cost center, but you're actually creating value, whether it's cost savings or new revenue, which is, again, why it's important to tie it back to value. And so, let me talk about what we're doing in IBM. So, we talk about an executable strategy. So that's exactly how we approached it. So we have an enterprise CDO. His name's Inderpal Bhandari. He and I were some of the founding members for the International Society for Chief Data Officers. His strategy when he came a year before I did was exactly that. Here's our data strategy. It's based on our business strategy. It's going to help us accelerate our business strategy goals. And over the course of the last 5 years since he's been here and 4 years since I've been here, we've been able to generate billions of dollars of value for IBM, both in form of cost savings and new revenue. That doesn't even count cost avoidance. And it's things as simple as, we're going to have a single view of our customer, right? Conceptually simple. Those are not really simple tasks. I think, most small companies have, 10, 20, 30 versions of a single customer. IBM's a complex company. At that point, we had 5 or 6 different businesses. Each of them had 10 or plus versions of our customer. So we now have a single version of our customer. We talk about customers as one thing. We understand them. We understand concepts like, who is a government-owned entity, right? We, from an ethical perspective, we want to know when we're doing business with the government so that we cannot be seen as bribing them, or we cannot be seen as being bribed, right? We want to make sure we interact with them appropriately. That's not necessarily a straightforward question to answer, especially when you go to parts of the world where a lot of companies are majority or minority owned by governments. So how do you treat them, right? You need a way to accurately and consistently get that answer so that everything's even. Looking at how do we apply AI to run our business better? So being able to predict, use our sales pipeline and predict what the end of a quarter is going to look like for how much revenue are we going to generate from that sales pipeline. That's not a straightforward question to answer because, it's a very complex model, because what happens is salespeople build their sales pipeline to some extent to match the pressure they get from management. And sometimes it's not realistic. So how do you extract what's real from a sales pipeline that's being inflated because the salespeople are saying, getting pressure from their management, you need bigger pipeline because we got to hit our targets, right? How much of that pipeline's real? How much isn't? And so being able to use AI and data to understand the dynamics of the individual opportunities in that pipeline so that you can accurately predict what's going to close, that adds a tremendous amount of value to our bottom line and to our top line, because there's things we can do to adjust. It also gives us more credibility with Wall Street and with our investors, because we are able to more accurately predict. Even if we're not going to hit our targets, we can be more transparent up front that we know where we are. Of course, 2020 was an odd year. It was an outlier. Models don't do well with outliers because they're based on how things, they're based on the past, and when today doesn't represent even remotely close to the past, it's hard to account for them. So that's kind of how some things we're doing internally. There's tons of other things we're doing internally in IBM.
Yeah. And, being a sales leader for many years, from my side in marketing, you touched on two huge challenges that I've always experienced. And it's really understanding the forecast, being able to predict it the right way, using the right technologies to do it, but also making sure that you have the right data for who you're reaching out to or who your team is trying to drive. And that's incredibly important. You wouldn't imagine how many times I've seen myself in databases under Anthony with an I, Tony, right? And it goes across the board. So those are challenges I've definitely experienced. What are some of the other, tough challenges that you've experienced within regards to handling data or just digital transformation in general?
So the hardest challenge of digital transformation is the cultural challenge, right? So even just getting people to use data in appropriate manners, and by appropriate manners, I mean a trusted source of data that is consistent, where everyone's looking at the same thing, where if a vice president looks at the data and gets an answer, the GM gets the same answer, and the SVP and the CEO all get the same answer, or at least that's explainable. And so today, and we're facing this internally. So my team has built a collection of management systems that we're using internally. And with some groups, when we're on meetings, it's a constant, okay, why are you using Excel? Why are you using PowerPoint? Why aren't you using the management system that we've built that should address these questions? And if it's not addressing the right questions, well, let's have a design thinking session, because I don't just talk about that. I'm an active driver of that, right? So let's have another design thinking session to really understand what questions you're trying to answer, and make sure we get you the output that you can get. And oftentimes, they're not even answering the right question when we start digging into it, and they'll work their way to that over time, which causes their teams to have to go back and iterate through extracting information from databases, putting them into Excel, manipulating the data, and putting it into PowerPoints. And we're finding that we're saving 23 hours per with 7 or 8 people per business unit of time by having these management systems, right? And so, it's not a tremendous amount of money, but a cultural transformation can really help drive adoption and save that money. So those people, it's not even about money at that point. Those are highly skilled people that could be doing much more value-added things than manipulating Excel and making PowerPoints.
Absolutely, and you kind of touched on the adoption. Even when it comes to like new technologies, do you have any advice for other CDOs that are trying to build out a strategy with all the new AI or machine learning concepts or other tools that they're bringing in-house today?
I think it really has to tie back to the outcomes again. I don't know how many clients I've gone into, meetings with, C-level executives, and they're like, well, we want to use deep learning. Okay, what problem do you want to solve? Right? So they haven't even thought about what problem they want to solve. And so I think it starts with the outcome. The simplest solution is always the best one. It's kind of working into the tools based on the use case, but having access to a set of tools that can address all your questions is really important. And that gets back to the whole cloud conversation, right? The hybrid cloud conversation, where having a cloud environment, whether you're on-prem or in a public cloud, is really important because typically every tool you could possibly need is available. We have Red Hat. On Red Hat, we have this concept of cloud packs. Within these cloud packs, you have everything you need from security to automation to data to across the board. And so that enables you to have a set of tools that as you have a problem you need to solve, you just provision it and you go. And so it's not so much about adoption of tools. It's about solving a problem and then having at your disposal the tools you need to solve that problem and create value for the business. So we need to flip this conversation. So, when I first moved into this space, one of my biggest frustrations when IT would come to me when I was still a business user was they would come to me and they would say, we need to buy this tool. We need this database. We need this, this server. We need this whatever. It's going to cost you $3 million and, here's what you'll get for it. The guy, Paul, who was my IT partner at the time, Paul would sit down. I'd say, okay, I know it's going to cost me. It wasn't 3. It was usually 5 to 8. Paul would sit down. I'd say, okay, I know it's going to cost me $5 million. Can we talk about what we're going to do? Right? I don't care what the tools are. And in fact, when I went to the other side, I think that was one of the most impactful changes that I had on that business was I stopped talking to the business about tools, and that empowered my team to actually use the right tool to solve the problem without having to go back to the business and saying, I know we said we were going to use Teradata for this, but we decided to go with Netezza, right? That kind of makes it look like you don't know what you're doing because you're changing tools, when in reality, who cares what tool I want to solve? Why am I having a conversation about this? All I care about is I need to do this, and I need to do it today, not 2 years from now, because, oh, by the way, when you deliver it 2 years from now, I've already solved that problem outside the system. I don't need this anymore. I need something else.
Yeah. And that's spot on, right? When I use the word tool, I was kind of kicking myself because it wasn't, maybe the right way to approach it. And you're right. I mean, it comes down to the outcomes that need to be driven. And then how do you back into what's going to help you get there fastest, right? And best. So, when you're talking to other CDOs, what are some of the advice that you provide them when they're looking to, seek for more funding for new data and analytics projects, around their organization? Do you have any advice that you could provide them?
Yeah. So the advice I usually give gets back to that decision portfolio, the design thinking workshop, right? So it's getting with the senior executives in the business, sitting down, going through with them and their teams a series of workshops to extract what are the outcomes or decisions that are going to help you drive value. What is the value that's associated with that outcome or decision? Because every decision in a company has some value. And then creating a portfolio of those decisions and prioritizing them within each business and across the company so that you can tackle these in a meaningful way that's prioritized as an enterprise and the money is going towards the right thing. And then using that as a metric system to say you are in fact realizing this value or not down the road. And so then when you start talking about seeking funding, you're not actually seeking funding. You're seeking to help the business get a return on investment. And so You then can go back to the business because the money almost always comes from the business, right? You don't typically get a separate set of money to do this. You go back to the business and you say, okay, we have this portfolio of decisions. When do we want to, or how fast we want to go through these? Okay, we're going to get $1 billion of value from this decision over the next 5 years. If we want to get this decision executed in the next 6 months, we need $1.5 million, right? So you want $1 billion in over 5 years? Give me $1.5 million right now, and we'll get going on it, right? And so it's no longer I need $5 million, like when Paul used to sit down with me, right? It's not, I need $5 million. It's, I'm going to help you generate $1 billion. Here's the team. Here's the investment we need to make. Let's get going.
I love it. People, process, technology, and using that to drive those outcomes. That's great and very insightful. I love it. So, really, as we look to kind of wrap up the CDO magazine, I really have one other question for you, Seth. And I wanted to really, understand, how is your strategy adapting over the next 6 to 12 months? And how does that relate to accelerating your customers' journey for the future?
Yeah. So, I think, again, COVID has had a huge impact on this, right? So, you look back to, this time last year, this concept of digital transformation, everyone was talking about it. Very few companies, and you know this as well as I do, so does everyone else that's watching, very few companies were actually committed, right? We're actually really, really moving down this path. When the pandemic hit, we couldn't show up to work. Businesses were changing, things were very different. We all had to figure out, how do we do things better? The way you do things better is by using data and AI, right? And so this greatly accelerated this concept of digital transformation. And I think as we look, and that led to, adoption of hybrid cloud, that led to adoption of ubiquitous use of data, it led to adoption of AI. What's still lagging, though, is trustworthy AI, right? So how do we really implement trustworthy AI at scale? And I think as we look into 2021 and probably the first half of 2022, we're going to start seeing an acceleration of, how do you build AI that's fair? How do you build AI that's transparent, explainable? And how do you build AI that's fair and explainable in a rapid and automatable way that you can then seamlessly integrate into processes to help employees and customers be better, right? Because when you think about it, the end goal of a digital transformation is a customer outcome, and the outcome should be to make that customer's better, cheaper, better customer's life better, cheaper, or faster. And you do that through those 3 concepts that I mentioned, through AI around, trustworthy AI, automation through AI, and understanding the language of the business.
Well, thank you for joining me today, Seth, and providing such valuable insight into your world and strategy. And to our viewers, please visit cdomagazine.tech for additional interviews. I really appreciate your time, insight, and I look forward to working with you soon. Thank you and take care.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Anthony. I really appreciate it. Had a good conversation.
Absolutely. Thank you.